The wind carried with it a bitter chill as the lonely cowboy rode into town, his hat pulled low over his eyes and his long coat wrapped around his frame. The leather reins clutched loosely in his calloused hands, the hooves of his weary horse clapping against the frozen earth like a solemn drumbeat announcing his arrival to a place that scarcely cared. He was a man who had spent years wandering trails that seemed endless, his life stitched together by dust, silence, and memories that kept him awake on long nights by the campfire. A man who had left pieces of himself buried in old battles, broken friendships, and a love that once promised him a future but slipped through his fingers like smoke on a windy day, leaving him a shadow of who he once dreamed to be. And as he rode through the snow-dusted main street of the small western town, his eyes scanned the wooden storefronts, the bakery sign swinging gently in the cold breeze, the saloon doors creaking with voices that carried laughter he could not join, and the blacksmith's hammer echoing in steady rhythm, like the pulse of a town that thrived despite the cold. But none of that caught his heart the way the sight before him did. For kneeling in the snow by a battered wooden barrel, marked as trash, was a young woman in a tattered beige dress, her hair falling in dark strands around her face, her hands trembling as she sifted through discarded food scraps. Broken bread crusts, half-frozen carrots, crumbled biscuits, her dignity unraveling before strangers' eyes, though no one bothered to stop and notice her pain, except him, the stranger who had only come for supplies but felt something far greater stir within his chest when he saw her desperation. He slowed his horse, swung one leg over the saddle, and landed with a crunch in the snow, his spurs clinking softly, his shadow stretching long across the cold ground. And as he approached her, his voice came low, steady, carrying the weight of miles traveled and burdens carried. "Ma'am, you don't belong here." Begging in the cold like this, and she startled, her wide eyes meeting his, eyes that told stories of hunger, sorrow, and a fight for survival that the world had already written off as lost. Yet beneath that suffering he saw a spark, faint but real, and she whispered with a voice nearly broken, "I was left here with nothing, not even bread to keep me alive." And though she tried to hold back tears, they fell anyway, freezing on her cheeks, and something in him broke. For he had known hunger, he had known loneliness, and though he carried scars invisible to others, he had always managed to ride on. But here was someone who had reached the end of her rope, someone who had been abandoned to the mercy of strangers, and he would not walk away. He took off his gloves, reached into his saddlebag, and pulled out a wrapped loaf of bread he had taken from his last stop on the trail, placing it gently into her trembling hands, watching her clutch it as though it were gold, and when she bit into it, the sound of soft bread crunching beneath her teeth felt like music more beautiful than any saloon piano could play, and the cowboy felt warmth stir inside him, a warmth he hadn't felt in years, a reminder that even in a world so cruel, kindness still had the power to heal wounds. She looked up at him with gratitude spilling from her gaze, whispering, "Why would you help me? A stranger?" And he replied simply, "Because I know what it feels like to be forgotten." And those words settled into the silence between them like a promise. And though he had come only for supplies, beans, flour, a bit of sugar, maybe whiskey, he realized his journey had delivered him something else entirely, something he never expected to find in a town where no one knew his name. A bride not of wealth or social standing, but of resilience, courage, and the kind of heart that kept beating even when the world tried to crush it. As townsfolk began to notice, some whispering, some shaking their heads, the cowboy ignored them, lifting the woman gently to her feet, brushing snow from her dress and asking her name, which she gave with a shy whisper. And though it mattered little to the crowd that mocked quietly, it mattered everything to him. For in that name he heard a beginning rather than an end. And so, with the setting sun painting the sky in hues of fire and gold, he led her to his horse, offering her not just food, but shelter, warmth, and a chance to walk beside him as he traveled. The trails that once seemed endless but now held purpose, for no longer was he truly alone, and no longer would she be left begging by the trash for survival, for together they would carve out a life, fragile yet strong, built not on wealth but on kindness and the unshakable bond of two souls that had found each other in the coldest of places. And dear listener, as you hear this story unfold, let it remind you that sometimes what we seek is not what we find, and what we find is often far greater than we ever imagined, just like this cowboy, who came for supplies but found love, redemption, and the strength to keep riding forward. So if you believe in stories of second chances, of love born from struggle, and of hearts healed by compassion. Make sure you subscribe to this channel, because many more powerful Western tales like this await you, stories that may touch your heart, inspire your soul, and remind you that even in the loneliest winters, hope always rides in when you least expect it.